An American has travelled the length of Vietnam to explore and capture the images of Vietnamese workboats. Where does his passion come from and what does it mean to the boat lovers as well as the long history of Vietnamese workboats? Let's find out in this edition of Talk Vietnam, as I have here with me Kent Preston. Hi, thank you very much for joining us. It is now your 11th time coming to the country. Can you share with us the latest update on your findings?
Yes, everything is changing in Vietnam. The things you see most commonly, roads, bridges, you're building 4-lane highways and big bridges, but you're also changing the way you're building boats and the style and type of boats you're building, as well as the fisheries they're intended to work in. So it's a very dynamic situation here, and it would be easier to say everything is changing rather than what thing has been updated.
Why are you so passionate about Vietnamese workboats?
Let's generalize that. I am passionate about boats in general, most particularly traditional boats. And Vietnamese boats, at the time I started this project, still had a close tie to a long, long history that's moderately well documented. And I thought that the probability was, at that time, 11 years ago, that the situation was fragile and that the workboats as they were at that time, with their direct connection back into history, may very well be doomed to extinction in the next generation. And I wanted to document how they are done now before it's gone.
All right, so how did it all start for you? Can you sort of share with us the very first moments a Vietnamese workboat stole your heart at first sight?
Actually, it was one of these thuyền, one of the round boats. I can't help that. It was in Vung Tau in 1971, which was actually my 12th trip, but I don't count it because it wasn't my choice. But in any event, I saw two kids in one of these thuyền going from one big blue workboat to another big blue workboat, fishing boats, good-looking fishing boats, in Vung Tau, when I had a weekend off one time. And I thought that was absolutely outrageous, that kids were paddling around in a basket that was totally round. The boats themselves looked an awful lot like boats at home. At that time, there were traditional wooden fishing boats where I come from. There aren't anymore. The thuyền is unique, or very nearly unique in the world, and seeing kids playing in it that way, just as though it were the most normal thing in the world, that was remarkable. But the fishing boats were really intriguing. They were good-looking, seagoing boats, obviously sturdy, obviously well kept up, nicely painted. It's obviously making a living. That's the thing about fishing boats. So it was very attractive, and I enjoyed it a bunch. Shortly after that, I actually had an opportunity to go down to My Tho and Can Tha and saw the Mekong River Delta boats. That was just totally mind-blowing. There are so many different kinds of boats in the Delta, not fishing boats usually, they're transporters. But that was the what would you say, the addition that made it an overwhelming interest.
Born in 1946, Ken Preston grew up in Alaska, where he became an avid fisherman and thus a dedicated boatman. Since his childhood, Preston has been looking for the perfect boat and has studied the subject from one end to the other. During his military service in the late 1960s, Preston developed an affinity for the people of Vietnam. In December 2004, he set out for Vietnam with the aim of photographing every type of boat in the country. Since then, he has returned to Vietnam once every year, riding about 16,000 miles through the countryside, hunting for boats, on the coast, in remote river mouth harbors, and on isolated sandy beaches, as well as far up rivers of the region. He remains engaged with the task to this day.
I really love the boats. They're beautiful, they're interesting. The skills that go into making the boats have been around for thousands of years and been doing good work for people going on the ocean or in the rivers. And things are dying out now, and I need to get them recorded before they're gone.
His studying the large variety of Vietnamese boats was put together in an ebook named Wooden Workboats of Vietnam, compiling hundreds of photos and wooden boats from north to south. Preston also helped edit the English version of Sailboats of Indochina, a classic late colonial account of Vietnamese ships and junks by J.B. Pietri, which was published in 1943.
After these 11 trips, obviously you've gone a long, long way from, falling in love with the very first boat in Cà Mau. What have been your proudest achievements throughout these trips?
Undoubtedly, it is just the having been persistent enough to actually catch the things happening, so that I have documentation of how a number of different types of boats are built and how they are utilized. The most stunning was the method of construction used at Samsan to build the very long, very graceful, beachable wooden boats there. It's a remarkable process where they build the bottom of the boat complete, flat bottom with a little curvature to it, about 50 feet long, complete with the bow stem sticking up and the transom sticking up in the back. So you have a large slice of melon on the beach, facing the ocean, very close to the ocean. Not quite as close as we are here, but very close. And then they build the sides of the boat alongside of it, complete. They build the right side on the right and the left side on the left. We're talking about wood this thick, 2 inches thick. We're talking about sides that are, 1.5 meters wide. That's a lot of weight. Then they put one form in the middle of the boat that shapes the shape of the middle of the boat, stand it up, brace it both ways, and a gang of men pick up that side and place it on the bottom and force it in and nail it off full length, and it fits. I mean, how did they do that? That is part of what I need so much to document, is that kind of skill and knowledge that requires year by year, family by family transmission before it's lost. That one was stunning because it's totally startling. I had examined the boats, completed boats, crawled all through them, taken photographs. I knew how they were put together as a finished product, and in my mind I had decided that it was done a different way, basically building it one board at a time up in place. It's not how it's done. So it was a really interesting and startling discovery. But the similar findings up in the Halong Bay area, at Cam Pha, at Kua La, the basket boats in Hue. Every time I have had a success like that and been able to document the methods used, it's been a major, got that one.
Vietnam has a long tradition of building various sorts of boats for seagoing work that are either purely bamboo basketry or a composite structure consisting of the bamboo basketry supported by greater or lesser amounts of wooden structure.
Dân tộc Việt Nam đã là dân tộc chinh phục biển từ rất sớm. Người Việt đã dùng những phương tiện rất là đơn giản như là chanh tre nứa lá đã làm bè tre để vượt đại dương để có thể đi rất xa, và dùng tre để làm các chiếc như ghe bầu, ghe nang là có thể là chinh phục được những quần đảo Hoàng Sa, Trường Sa thuộc chủ quyền Việt Nam. Đặc điểm của các loại thuyền Việt Nam, nó tuy nhỏ, không to lớn như tất cả các thuyền khác của Trung Hoa hay của các nước trên thế giới, nhưng mà nó có sức thông minh, bền bỉ, lanh lợi để tạo ra các chiến thắng quân địch và có thể là để mở mang bờ cõi và khai thác biển cả.
Like other peoples whose life is deeply connected to the sea, Vietnamese people made certain contributions to the overall maritime development of the world, some of which are the use of bamboo in building boats, the way to hang the sail, and how to use xiềng or leer to prevent the boats from being carried away by strong wind.
Ta đi buồm thì gió thổi chúng ta có một độ dạt nhất định. Thì trong thuyền cổ của Việt Nam thì có cái lĩa thì đặt ở trên đầu mũi thuyền, đã đưa xuống để chống cái độ dạt, và cái bánh lái cũng rút lên rút xuống được để chống độ dạt. Và đồng thời thuyền linh động để vào cái vùng biển cạn, vào vùng nước cạn được, chúng ta kéo cái lĩa và cái bánh lái lên được tùy theo cái độ nông sâu của cái địa hình. Chúng ta nhìn trong cái lòng Việt Nam thì chúng ta cũng có thấy được có cái hình tượng của con thuyền, có cái lĩa, có cái bánh lái. Và mãi sau này trong các loại thuyền hiện đại của phương Tây và họ làm thuyền buồm thì họ bắt đầu họ có những cái chống dạt đó, người ta gọi là cái rudderboard hay centerboard hay skill, đều là một cái tính năng đó hết để họ đưa xuống để chống dạt và để giữ thuyền đi đúng hướng.
What types of Vietnamese boats are only native to Vietnam, and what's so impressive about them?
Well, that's really pretty easy. Boats that are actually baskets or are in significant measure baskets are pretty close to unique in Vietnam. You can find some references to Iraqi woven boats for the marsh Arabs living in the swamps. But other than that, people going out on the ocean in baskets, it just doesn't happen anywhere else that I ever know of. And so the use of basketry in the construction of boats, not just the round twin tongue, but real boats of substantial stature, that's remarkable, unique in the world, and it's still going on, or at least, yes, it's still going on, and to the extent that it is starting to die out, there are still good examples left that you can examine and document how it was done. So it's very interesting.
So what's the intelligent thing about these boats, about the ways these boats are made?
Well, that's been recognized a long time, is that a wooden boat that is all wood and is launched off the beach and returns to the beach is inevitably going to pound on the sand occasionally. And the sand is soft when you pick it up, but it's extremely hard when you bounce a boat off of it. And that will crack ribs, or it will split planks, and it will cause the gap between the planks to widen and allow the water to flow in and drown your sailor. And this has been a problem for beach boats all over the world, and various ways they've overcome the problem. Basketry has the advantage of being flexible, even though it can hold its shape as a boat. But if you bounce it on the sand, it can basically squat and come back up again. And in this case, you have tar waterproofing the space between the pieces of bamboo. And if you crack the tar a little bit, it's not a big deal. You just heat it up the next day and let the tar flow back together, and you have a watertight boat again. There are a number of ways that the boats have been built to capitalize on that, so that in really large sizes they use wooden components, but they fasten them together flexibly rather than bolting them or screwing them together. The high quality hardwood is essential. The use of wooden or bamboo fastenings instead of bolts and screws is really interesting. And it contributes to the flexibility of the structure. It's a very intelligent solution. It's been evolved over a long time. The records go way back on these. So it's a very effective method.
One of the destinations during Ken Preston's trip to learn about Vietnamese traditional boats is Kim Bông village. This is the biggest wooden boat-making villages in the central province of Quảng Nam. He has returned to the village after his first visit 8 years ago, and this time, what has attracted him is a small but beautiful sailing boat that may soon disappear, the Ghe Nang.
If I were a rich man, I would take this home, put it in a container, and take it back to Seattle with me. It's a lovely boat, beautifully built, wonderfully built.
This boat is one among a few ghe nang remained in Vietnam. It is no longer used to earn a living in the area, and so the owner asked Võ Xuân Phương, a skillful wooden boat maker, to rebuild it for leisure activities.
How long will it take to convert this back to a sailing boat?
3 tuần.
Oh, wow. So will that also replace the bamboo, or will that leave the bamboo, this bamboo in place?
Con ra còn nguyên bản, nó còn ngon mà.
How many men will work on the boat?
Thì làm cái này có 4 người.
4 người?
4 người.
4 người, 3 tuần?
3 tuần.
Okay, so here in Hoi An, can someone make the new sail?
Bây giờ mình là không còn đóng mới nữa. Cũ tăng trang sửa chữa lại chứ không đóng mới nữa.
When will you start on rebuilding?
Bây giờ làm chiếc nó xong rồi làm chiếc này.
As others of this kind, this boat was made from bamboo. It is a cheap, available and light material, which can help the boat easily absorb the waves and obviously makes it lighter than other wooden boats.
Đem cái tre về chẻ ra rồi phơi cho nó khô đi. Rồi bắt đầu lấy đồ mài dốt thành cái mảnh như vậy đó. Cái đồ đan lại mảnh bự đó rồi là cuộn lại và bố trí là nâng thành cái hình tượng của mê.
The ghe nang was fast, and fast comes from light, horsepower and weight. It's the same cars or sailboats. We want it light and lots of horsepower. Ghe nang had so much sail. I'm really eager to see if we can get this one going again, or build a copy of it. That would be even lovelier.
For Preston, to see such traditional boats riding the waves at sea was an unlikely dream, so seeing the restoration of such an old boat at least met part of his desires.
When it's finished, it will be like a new boat, but it will be the shape of the old one, and it will have a lot of the old structure left in it, so it was less expensive than building all brand new. So that's the kind of thing that you lose as soon as you stop doing the work. So this makes me very happy that the work is being done. The old boat is being put back together.
Vietnamese traditional sailing boats are no longer used, having been replaced by power vessels. The boats in the past were not capable of staying at sea for so long, but the old vessels display the traditional boat-building craft of the past.
So what are some of the advantages that these Vietnamese boats have over the other boats you've seen around the world?
Their ability to be launched off of ocean beaches and retrieved through the surf over an ocean beach is remarkable. The thuyền tung, you have to see it to believe it, but once it's landed on the beach, can be turned on its edge and rolled up the beach by one man like a wheel, and it makes it a very effective way of getting the boat out of trouble if the waves are bigger. That doesn't occur for a lot of other boats.
So it's a mobility as well as the expenses that it takes to make one of these boats, right?
It is the way that it answers the needs of its user so well. That's what a workboat has to do. It has to answer the needs of the fisherman or the freight hauler that he has in order to do his job and make a living and come home and see his family again instead of drowning. And these boats do that very well.
During the prime days of these boats, when they were most diverse, could you tell us more about how the shapes, the sails and everything sort of diversified and were different from each other back then?
Oh my gosh. Well,
In a nutshell.
in a nutshell, I'm going to say that's the subject of a 300-page book that's already been written. But the boats that are farther offshore here are called ghe nang. They're a fairly good sized boat, up to 50, 60 feet long. Not thinking meters, 18, 20 meters or smaller. They were originally sailing boats with 3 masts and very large rigs. They were very fast. They were very hard to keep right way up, and that evolved a group of sailors here that were remarkably skillful, and they were very, very unique even in Vietnam. They used a sail which is common in Europe called a lug sail. That's four-sided sail. And that was actually quite common from here north to Hue, north to Dong Hoi, and as far south really as Cambodia.
Okay, so obviously you're a foreigner, quite someone, you know, strange and exotic to the work you're doing, researching Vietnamese workboats. But are there any more people like you out there? What's the international interest in Vietnamese workboats like? Can you share a little bit more?
There are a few other people I have met that are either interested in the history of Vietnamese boats or the historical impact of Vietnamese boats on international affairs hundreds of years ago, actually I know one lady, Charlotte Pham, who is half French and half Vietnamese. It's interesting. She looks like a French woman, except she has Vietnamese hair and coloring, and she speaks both Vietnamese and French fluently, and is quite an interesting investigator in Vietnam. But anyway, Charlotte has much the same interests I do in the recent history of Vietnamese workboats.
Now that we certainly know that Ken's is someone who is so obsessed about Vietnamese fishing boats, but however, he was not the only one. There were previously some others. And how about the other international interest in traditional Vietnamese wooden boats? Let's find out in our following story.
The uniqueness, practicality, and creativity embraced in the transport means of fishermen from the southern to northern coast of Vietnam have been the prime subject of discussion for many maritime adventurers from countries such as France, Portugal, the UK, China, and the US since ancient times. The first person often quoted by boat researchers is Admiral François Edmond Paris, who wrote Essay on Non-European Naval Architecture. The book is regarded as a masterpiece by maritime ethnologists. His meticulous notes and painstaking drawings made Paris the first maritime researcher to introduce boats in Hue and Da Nang to the world. It can be acknowledged that there is a French school of Vietnamese boats and maritime life researchers, starting with GMDO, Chanot. Among these are the people who have King Gia Long reinforced his naval forces, such as Pierre Paris, J.B. Pietri, architect J.Y. Clay in the 1930s and 1940s of the 20th century, or Madame Françoise Hubal, who wrote Wood and Vietnam Boats, published in 1987 in Paris. In the 2000s, John Doney, an American who was infatuated with Vietnamese wooden boats, founded a fund called Vietnam Wooden Boat Foundation. The fund is dedicated to preserving the Southeast Asian country's glorious maritime past. Ken Preston joined the foundation afterwards and have edited the English version of Sailboats of Indochina by J.B. Pietri. However, Doney was killed in a car accident in the US in 2009. But his artifacts brought over from Vietnam, such as round fishing boats and traditional boats from Vietnam 13 Hue province, are still being preserved at the center housed in Townsend Harbor in Massachusetts.
Chính những hành động của ông John Doney và ông Ken Preston thúc đẩy, tạo ra được một cái niềm cảm hứng. Vì câu hỏi đặt ra đối với tôi là thế này: tại sao những người nước ngoài, tại sao những bạn Mỹ lại yêu thuyền Việt Nam đến thế? Họ đã tham gia chiến trận ở Việt Nam, đã nhìn thấy các thuyền Việt Nam, và ngay họ quay về Việt Nam để nghiên cứu, để chụp ảnh, để đưa cả những chiếc như là thuyền nan, hay là những chiếc ghe nang, hay là những chiếc, đặc biệt là chiếc nóc bê từ Huế mà về tận California, thì về tận Washington, thì điều đó thì chứng tỏ rằng là tại sao người ta lại có niềm say mê, và những điều đó đã tạo cho tôi một niềm cảm hứng, thúc đẩy tôi phải làm rất là nhanh chóng công việc này.
You've also read a piece by Petrie as well. Can you tell us more about him and his study into Vietnamese workboats?
John Petrie. I happen to have a copy of his book here, recently translated from French into Vietnamese, which is interesting. I didn't have anything to do with translating it from French to Vietnamese, but I did have a considerable part in the effort to translate it from French to English, so that it's actually now available in all three languages. If you want to buy it in the original French, it's quite expensive, but the paper-bound versions in Vietnamese and English are not. Jean Petrie was a French colonial administrator who in 1943 was pretty much at the peak of his career. He was in charge of all fisheries in Vietnam. So he was the commissioner of fishing in Vietnam for the French government. He was a naturalist by training, biologist, and he was very skillful with pen and ink drawings. And he had spent basically his whole working career in Vietnam working through that basic side of the French government in Vietnam. And he had formed opinions and drawn sketches and made notes about all the fishing boats and other workboats along the coast for all that, his whole career. I don't know how long that really was, but I would surmise that it was at least 20 years and maybe more. So 43 was the end point of that when he published the book. There was a second edition in 46, which was the year I was born, you know, so this puts Jean Petrie and me at very slightly overlapping points in history. His book, as a consequence, is a combination of drawings and verbal descriptions, and kind of like you asked earlier, it is largely organized geographically. He started in the south. He started actually in Cambodia, which was part of French Indochina at the time. He started in the south and worked all the way to Mong Kai. So his book is organized exactly the opposite of the way mine is likely to be. He was a romantic, and he admitted it. So his language was deliberately archaic, using old-fashioned sailing terms. It's just charming, but it made it a real bear to translate. You certainly couldn't use Google Translate on it. It made the most astounding, humorous translations. So it was a hard labor with a couple of big dictionaries and one little specialist dictionary having to do with seagoing antiques in France. I still don't speak French, but I can read a certain amount now as long as it's about boats.
Okay, so how important is his work and his knowledge in your own process of interpreting and researching Vietnamese workboats?
I wish it were more so, because it is only useful now to the extent that his findings can still be seen in some form today, or during the period of time that I've been doing my work. And very, very little can be. The larger boats that he described have almost all been replaced by a more standardized kind of a boat, as Vietnam has become much less a country of isolated ports and has become a unified country with a unified vision, the ability to transmit designs, the ability for people to compare how things work the full length of the coast. So you don't have the very detailed local knowledge resulting in very specific boat types at each port. Example is Gainang is still here. So his Gainang, his drawing is a classic. We should look it up and you can show it to someone. It's a very, very beautiful drawing. It shows these boats as they are still today, except for their sailing rigs. That was his focus, was the title of the boat is Thuyền Buồm. In French it was Voilier d'Indochine, sailboats of Indochina, which is how we translated it on the English edition. Anyway, so he was primarily interested in sailboats, although he did deal also with rowing boats. To the extent that there are still remnants of boats like the ones he reported on the coast today, it's wonderful to be able to have that correlation and say, yes, this is a distinct follow-up on something from 1943.
Sailboats of Indochina is a treasure to enthusiasts of wooden boats, sailboats, and the building of traditional wooden boats, thanks to Pietru's attention to details. He observed and made descriptions of numerous details of Indochina boats, such as the sail and tackles, techniques of boat building, and supporting equipment. Many researchers consider the book a precious document for their work, and that the book demonstrates skills and creativity of Vietnamese people through the author's brilliant illustration.
Ông đã hệ thống tất cả các loại thuyền của nước ta và sau đó rồi ông so sánh với lại tất cả các thuyền trên thế giới để nổi bật cái gì là đặc sắc của dân tộc Việt Nam, cái gì là có ảnh hưởng của nước ngoài và cái gì là có những yếu tố bản địa, tức là do chính dân tộc ta đã phát minh ra.
Till now, sailboats of Indochina is not only a good companion for Vietnamese culture and maritime researchers, but also an intriguing material for sailboats, water sports, and boat miniature enthusiasts. The book therefore enhanced the love for the sea and islands itself.
So I understand that you also came up with your own book as well. Can you tell us more about this and what's the meaning behind the name?
That was the Wooden Workboats of Vietnam. It was intended to be the product of that first trip with the camera that self-destructed and the photographs that were not usable, and actually put it together after the third trip. And it was attractive, had a lot of nice photographs in it. There's going to be another one, probably the same name, or perhaps it will be 2 or 3 different books that take on the same topic, but in better detail and hopefully with a great deal less error.
The Wooden Workboats of Vietnam is the result of Preston's 9 years of annual field expedition. Each lasted for 6 weeks or 2 months, during which the region's boats were sought out and photographed. Thousands of photos and notes were arranged in order, with the comments of Preston himself. He tries to document the vessels in use for the past decade, with the hope of looking for traditional boat building techniques.
Chúng ta đều biết là các thuyền bè truyền thống ngày càng mất đi và thay bằng các thuyền cơ giới, nhưng tinh thần của thuyền truyền thống vẫn còn mãi mãi, đó là người Việt Nam chinh phục biển. Mà muốn chinh phục biển phải có thuyền, cho nên là điều kiện tiên quyết để chinh phục biển là thuyền và công nghệ đóng thuyền, kỹ thuật đóng thuyền. Thì chính Ken Preston là có một cái động thái để giúp để bảo tồn lại những vấn đề đó, cho nên là những hành động của anh Ken Preston là tích cực, và điều đó là càng khích lệ chúng ta phải cần có một cái bảo tàng thuyền, bảo tàng hàng hải xứng đáng với lại tầm vóc của dân tộc ta, và cái đó cũng sẽ đóng góp rất nhiều trong cái việc giáo dục về tinh thần biển cho dân tộc Việt Nam.
Bản thân là một người Việt Nam, mình cảm thấy là rất là cảm thấy áy náy khi là một người từ phương Tây họ nghiên cứu về thuyền Việt Nam, và họ cho rằng cái sự đặc biệt của thuyền Việt Nam và người đi biển ở Việt Nam rất là am hiểu về thuyền buồm, và họ rất là trân trọng điều đó. Họ bỏ cả hết quãng đời của họ, thời gian của họ để họ lo về cái thuyền buồm như thế, về nghiên cứu về thuyền buồm Việt Nam. Thì tại sao chúng ta, người Việt Nam, chúng ta không nghiên cứu về nó và đào sâu vào nó?
So you mentioned earlier that there are now fewer and fewer wooden workboats in Vietnam. Why do you think these boats should be preserved?
I think that there is no way to commercially preserve a boat who cannot make a living for his people anymore. Once the boat doesn't make a living for the fisherman or the freighter, then it's over for that boat. It takes only a very little time. If you aren't making money, you don't repair the boat, you don't paint it, you don't keep it clean, it rots. In this climate, 5 years is more than enough. It'll be just driftwood. So if it isn't going to make a living, then it needs to be, and here we come to a part that I think maybe has a future, it needs to be a museum piece. And many countries in Europe, America, have numerous maritime museums that highlight local maritime history, and they do so partly because it's colorful and interesting, and partly because it was historically important to them. I think that the level of importance in Vietnam is at least comparable. The fishing boats in Vietnam are just part of each other. You people eat more fish than anybody I know, and then you use fish sauce to flavor it. So you're really dependent on fishing boats. And you've had such an interesting and colorful history of different kinds of fishing boats. That history ought to be preserved. You're not going to preserve it by saying, you have to keep fishing with that old fish boat because it's a classic. You need to say, that's a classic, let's conserve it in a museum environment. And there are some wonderful examples available in this world of museums that are living museums where the construction of the boat and the maintenance of the boat and at least a modified operation of the boat, maybe for taking tourists out for a short ride or a demonstration or training for young men and women, that kind of thing, that's done all over the world and done really well in places. Vietnam could do with that, and that would be really a good thing. I would love to see that happen.
So how would you suggest that one could balance between the profitability and preserving traditions when it comes to traditional wooden boats?
It's going to be the adaptation to the changes of the fishing environment and the encouragement or discouragement by the national government. As the government perceives a problem with diminishing fish resource, they're going to manage it and reduce the fishing pressure. That's going to reduce the number of boats going fishing. They're going to subsidize the construction of larger boats for deep water fishing, and that's going to increase the number of larger boats that are built and go to sea and in the East Sea. So that's not something that is romantic. That's something that is, we have to feed the country, and this is how it needs to be done. And so that's a different thing entirely. Setting in motion the means of preserving the history of the boats and good examples of as many as possible, that's a museum function, and this would be a good time to get started.
Fantastic. So what future conquest would Ken Preston want to embark on in the future?
I've actually been thinking that the most important thing for me to accomplish now is to actually sit down and write the book. So that actually is the most important challenge. Now, what would I really like to do with the next 10 years of my life? There's a good question. How about ride from Hanoi to Paris on a Win 100?
Oh no. I would love to see that.
Well, it would make a good one for Talk Vietnam.
Wouldn't it? Well, we might have to go back to you after you're done with it.
I don't know. The serious answer to your question is I need to write the book. That's where I'm at. I've taken enough pictures. I've made enough notes. I'm getting old enough that I'm starting to forget shit. It's time that I got it down into a format that's usable for other people.
So, sort of, what is your ultimate wish that you would like to become true, that you haven't actually accomplished before, besides a book?
All right. I want to walk down to the beach near Tuanan, near Hue, and find somebody just starting to build one of the surf boats. And I will take a hotel room as close as I can find it, and I will be in that man's way every day until he launches the boat. That would be, finally got it. I've not been able to do that. There are intricacies in that construction that I can guess at, and if I had more faith in my guesses, that would be good. But I really would need to see and photograph and film how is it that it's done, and that would be the ultimate win.
I would love to see the look on your face when that happens, and we wish that it becomes a reality, so we might have some more to talk about on Talk Vietnam. Okay, so that's it for this edition of Talk Vietnam. Now, we hope that you enjoyed our little talk about traditional Vietnamese fishing boats, and we hope that the talk also inspired you to love and appreciate our boats just a little bit more. And if you are another enthusiast of the traditional Vietnamese wooden boats, then please reach Ken Preston. He's the man for you to go to. Thank you for tuning in to Talk Vietnam. I'm Michael Liu, and until next time.